So God, right now we just pray, Holy Spirit, that you would break what needs to be broken. God, I really get a sense that today we're not just going to be a church that calls itself liberty, we're going to be a church that experiences liberty. Freedom from those things that have held us back, that have robbed us from joy and peace. And so God, right now I pray for all of us here today who have reasons and thinking in our mind that has robbed us of the joy of the Lord. We're going to break that this morning. Come on, if you believe God's going to do something this morning, why don't you give him an amen, a shout of praise. You can take your seats. Thank you so much. So as you heard from Cheryl, we're in the kind of 3-4 days into our week of prayer and fasting, 10 days of prayer and fasting, and I hope it's going well for you. And as you can see, we're on a journey to Pentecost, and one of the things I always think about when we do anything like this, when we either journey towards the birth of Jesus or the crucifixion or the birth of the church, is I kind of put myself in the shoes of the people. And so right now I'm kind of thinking, well, what would the disciples have been thinking? Okay, we're kind of 3 days on, 3 and a bit days ago, Jesus would have ascended into heaven. And just before Jesus went to heaven, we read that he says, I will send you the Holy Spirit not too many days from now. Translated into South African, he would have said, the Spirit is coming now. Right? Now. Yeah, maybe just now, but now, just now. And I don't know about you, but if I'm the disciples, 3 days in, we've been waiting for 3 days. I wonder if someone went, so do you think he's actually coming? I wonder who was the first one to have a doubt and who was the first one to express a doubt. It might have been Thomas. We call him Doubting Thomas. I think it's a little bit unfair on Thomas. But and I think that there must have come that moment. There must have been that moment where in the midst of their waiting, in the midst of their anticipation for what God was going to do, someone must have said, I wonder. Someone must have expressed a doubt. Someone must have, maybe anxiety rose up. I wonder if we've wasted our time. Did we hallucinate it all? Did we imagine it all? And so today, as we journey towards Pentecost, I want to preach a message called Overcoming Doubt and Insecurity. Overcoming doubt and insecurity. When we talk about insecurity, we're talking about that feeling or that thinking that says, I can't do it. I'm not enough. I don't have what it takes. What if everyone finds out I'm faking it? What if everyone thinks I'm a loser? What if no one will love me? Some people have started using the phrase imposter syndrome. Have you heard that? Imposter syndrome is that syndrome that you feel even when you're experiencing success, you still think you're a failure. And so regardless of how well you're doing corporately, how well you're doing in your career, you still feel like an imposter because on the inside you're insecure, even though on the outside you're doing incredibly well. I read a stat about insecurity that said 6 out of every 7 people struggle with insecurity. 6 out of every 7 people. This is not just an issue, this is an epidemic. This is a chronic issue that our society and our culture is facing. I had an opportunity to sit under Amy Orr Ewing. She is, try to say that name fast. Amy Orr Ewing. She is an apologetist and she kind of studies culture, and she speaks about the fact that our world is plagued with a thing called chronic uncertainty. Chronic uncertainty. And she speaks about this. She says, our world, the way we've structured society is there are certain systems and structures that are supposed to catch our doubt and insecurity so that we don't have to live with them. Think about the medical world, right? We go to doctors because when we're insecure about our faith, they're supposed to give answers, right? When we're insecure about our old age, the government should come alongside us and help us with pension. And she says the problem is we live in a world where all of those systems are failing. Now, she was saying this in England. And I was like, lady, our electricity is failing. Our roads we South Africans get this chronic uncertainty, right? Even the roads that are supposed to hold our cars don't even do it properly. Right? And so we get this chronic uncertainty. And so when you couple this idea that we can't trust the systems of society and we are fighting imposter syndrome, you bring it all together, we're fighting this issue of uncertainty and doubt. And please don't ever think that someone who looks confident on the outside isn't struggling with insecurity on the inside. Just because someone looks confident doesn't mean they're completely secure. In fact, insecurity and confidence can be roommates and live in the same heart and same mind at the same time. And I wish, as a pastor, I could stand up here and say, listen, I've got the answer for you. I don't struggle with this, but I know what you can do. But as a pastor, man, I struggle with insecurity. When it comes time for worship and the first song starts playing, I make sure I don't look behind me. Because 90% of our church only arrives after the third song. I see you. I see you. And so I make sure, to make sure I don't get too insecure, I only look back after the third song. That's funny because it's true. When I come home after preaching like I'm doing today, or after a session at Liberty U, often what I do on the drive home is I go, God, man, I really hope I didn't mess that up. And I'm genuine, and what I do is I overanalyze everything, and eventually I get to a point in my prayer where I'm like, God, I'm sorry. You should never let me preach ever again. Some of you are going, yeah, you should. That's fine. I don't know why they let you do it this time. And so there's this thing, and I don't know if you ever hoped something like this, but I hoped I would grow out of it. I hoped I would just get better as I got older. But for those of you who understand what I'm talking about, the more you care about something, the more insecure you can feel about it. The more you care about your spouse, the more you care about your kids, the more you care about your career or your calling, actually the more insecure you can feel, not less. And getting older is not an automatic remedy. You know that saying, time heals all wounds? Not always true. Sometimes time can make you more vulnerable than anything else. And so today, for those of us in this place, for those of us struggling with doubt and insecurity, I want to start by asking this question. What are you doubting yourself about? Where are you insecure? Perhaps for you, you doubt whether you will ever find the person who will love you. Perhaps for you, you doubt whether you'll ever find that job you're dreaming about. Perhaps you doubt that God would heal you or someone you love. Or perhaps you're so insecure that you don't think God can use you because you're so broken. Perhaps you have insecurity around your career, your finances, the way you look, how much you weigh. Some of us, the moment of greatest insecurity is that moment when we look at ourselves in the mirror. Come on, am I preaching to anyone here this morning? It's all gone nice and quiet. And I think we live in a society, and I think South Africa even exacerbates this a little bit, where we don't talk about what's going on the inside. I'm a man. I don't struggle with insecurity. I'm a man. I don't do that. And yet the reality is, the more we remain in silence, the more our insecurity speaks. The softer I keep about it, the louder the insecurity gets in me. And so to unpack this, I want to read to you a moment where God responds, God himself responds to a person's insecurity. So there's this moment of insecurity that is directed at God, and I want to show you how God responds, because I think he wants to do some of that work here today in each and every single one of us. Exodus chapter 4, verse 1 to 9. Then Moses answered, "But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.' The Lord said to him, 'What is that in your hand?' He said, 'A staff.' And he said, 'Throw it on the ground.' So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses ran from it." It's exactly the right response. I don't even like natural snakes, and now I've got a supernatural snake in front of me. Damn right I'm running away. But the Lord said to Moses, "Put out your hand and catch it by the tail." I'm no snake wrangler, but I'm pretty sure that's the wrong way to do it. So he put out his hand. I wonder if he was like this. And catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. And God says, "That they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you." Again, the Lord said to him, "Put your hand inside your cloak." And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Then God said, put your hand back inside your cloak. So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, that they may believe the latter sign. If they will not believe even these two signs or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile, pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. Now the context here, as you may have picked up on or you may have read before, is Moses is having an all fall down. Okay? He's not kind of saying, what if they don't believe me? He says flat out, they're not going to believe me. Right? His insecurity is so entrenched that it's defining an encounter he hasn't even had yet. How many of you know what that feels like? You've already decided what someone else is going to say to you even before you've had the conversation. You've already convinced yourself of someone else's no before you've even asked the question. And so he allows this insecurity to rise up. I mean, the level of this insecurity, he's literally in front of a burning bush that's not being consumed. The bush is talking to him with the voice of God, and he's arguing with the bush. He's arguing about what's possible with a burning bush that's not burning and it's talking. How big does your insecurity have to be for you to argue with a burning, talking bush? But he's an 80-year-old. No, whoa, calm down. He's an 80-year-old. He still has 40 more years. He's not done by any stretch of the imagination. He's an 80-year-old running away from his own people in isolation, looking after another man's sheep. And it says in the King James Version that he's in the back end of nowhere when the burning bush meets him. Right? He is literally, if you were to plot where do I want to be in the next 10 years, I guarantee it's not fugitive, runaway, isolated, back end of nowhere. No one puts that on their vision board. Some of you actually back end of nowhere sounds quite nice. But his insecurity becomes so entrenched that even when God calls him to a grand design, he counts himself out. He counts himself out. Into this context of doubt and insecurity, God does three things. And as we so often say, God never does anything by accident. And if we read this correctly, God is directly responding to the insecurity in Moses. He's not just giving general. He's saying, hey, I see your insecurity. I see it raising its ugly head. Here's how I'm going to respond to this. And so today I want you to see how God responds to insecurity and why. Because if we just live with our doubt and insecurity, we're allowing a thief to live in our house. Because insecurity and doubt will rob you of joy and it will rob you of peace. And the more you give it space in your life, the more you are entertaining a thief that should be kicked out. So what does he say? Number one, in response to self-doubt, that Moses is having it all fall down, God says to Moses, what's in your hand? And many people have preached in what this means and all that kind of stuff. But God says, what's in your hand? What do you have access to? What resource do you have? And Moses, as every shepherd would, he's holding a staff. And God says to him, I want you to throw that staff down and it's going to change into something. And Moses freaks out because it turns into a snake and runs away, which is entirely fair. Now think about this for a moment. As a shepherd, your staff is your support structure. It's what you've lent on for years. It's what you use to defend yourself and protect yourself. And so in this moment, what you see Moses doing is not just running from a staff, but he's running from his support system. He's running from the very thing that had sustained him in the wilderness. And now he's running from it. I love the fact that God says to someone struggling with self-doubt, hey, you see that stick? Bam, snake. Doesn't seem very sensitive, right? It's not like God is high on EQ right now. If you were doing an EQ test, this might not be the appropriate response. Hey, Moses, you see that staff? That staff that you used to protect you from that lion? That staff that you used to climb up this mountain? That staff that you leaned on when you were too tired to keep yourself up straight? Bam, snake. But I don't think God is being insensitive. I don't think God is being funny. I think what God is saying is that often the worst thing for us to do in the place of insecurity is lean on what we've always lent on. The very thing that Moses had leant on for 40 years, God changes into something dangerous. Often the things we lean on in our time of insecurity have no power to lift us out of insecurity. Many of us have been leaning on things, have been trusting on things, and instead of inspiring us to a place of courage, they only ever leave us in a place of insecurity and doubt. What is your staff? What are you leaning on? What supports you as you stay in that place of insecurity? Perhaps you have an ability. Perhaps you're really good at something. And so every time this insecurity raises its head, you lean into what you're good at. Perhaps there's a relationship. And every time insecurity raises its head, you lean into that security. I'm pretty convinced that that is the origin of the friend zone. Some of us are stuck in the friend zone because we're too scared to stop leaning on what we've always lent on. Perhaps you know that you're quite intelligent, and so every time insecurity comes along, you try to outthink it. Perhaps you've got finances, and your finances are a buffer for you, and so whenever insecurity comes up, you just spend more money. Perhaps you use humor and sarcasm. So every time insecurity comes up, you make a joke about it, and everyone laughs with you, and you're fine, but nothing's changed. You're still just as insecure and doubtful as you were. So what is that crutch that in your security has zero power to lift you out? No matter how much Moses leant on the staff, he was never lifted out of insecurity. And so God takes this very thing of leaning, of support that he'd been leaning on for 40 years, but it never changed him. And he changes it not just into something random. Think about it. If God wanted to just get rid of the staff, he could have made it disappear like that. He could have turned it into dust. But what does God do? He makes his support system poisonous. He turns the very thing Moses had been leaning on into something toxic and poisonous. Some of us can relate to this. Some of us have lent into a relationship for so long, and then all of a sudden that person turns toxic. And the very person who used to be able to advise you in and through everything now feels distant. Perhaps you've got a friend like that. Perhaps there's a person in your family who you used to tell everything to, and now you feel like you can tell nothing. Perhaps, let's go back to ability. Perhaps you've got that ability that you've always relied on. It's always been your source of go-to. It's always been your support. And then you go through a moment like this, and all of a sudden that ability gets attacked like never before. And the very thing you thought was your strength now becomes a target for everyone's accusations. Man, as a leader and a preacher, you stand up here every week thinking, I can preach, and then someone can give you harsh feedback. Been through seasons where what I thought was my strength has become toxic and unsupporting. So what is it in your life that perhaps God is trying to show you? Stop leaning on that. And perhaps it has to become a little bit toxic before you'll stop leaning on it. I love the fact that God says to Moses, pick it up again. How heavily do you think Moses leant on that staff after it was a snake? Instead of leaning on it like this, I'm pretty sure he walked like this now, just in case you come back. So here's what I think God is saying. The staff is not wrong, it's the level of dependence you have on the staff that's wrong. Right? So that relationship is not wrong, the level of dependence you have. That ability, that gifting, those finances, that humor, those things aren't inherently wrong, but the dependency you have on them, in the midst of your doubt and insecurity, that might be what's hurting you. So can I ask you, what's in your hand? What are you leaning on? I think even for us in South Africa, I think sometimes the thing that we lean on is our toughness. No matter what comes our way, I'll find a way through it. I'll pull up my socks. I'll buy a bigger car to navigate the potholes. I'll buy an inverter. And what happens is over and over the years, we've just gotten harder and harder and harder. Why? Because it's our staff. But it's so easy for that hardness to become toxic in your marriage. It's so easy for that hardness to become toxic with your kids. So number one, what are you leaning on? Number two, Moses is asked to put his hand inside his coat. And some translations actually say puts it inside his shirt. In other words, put your hand on your skin. Put your hand on your skin, and when he pulls it out, it's leprous. There's disease all over his hand, and then God graciously says, put it back in, and he pulls it out, and it's completely healed. What is God trying to say to a person battling insecurity and doubt with that action? Do you think he's trying to say, well, at least you're not a leper? I don't think that's the scenario here, right? I don't think God is sarcastic like that. What is God trying to say to Moses about his identity? In order to understand this, we've got to understand that in ancient culture, skin disease was the most visible disease you could have, but it was also often incredibly contagious. And so it becomes the quintessential picture of what being unclean and unworthy looks like. In fact, by the time Jesus comes along, when someone had leprosy, every time they saw another person, it didn't matter who the person was, they would have to shout, unclean! I'm unclean. Don't come. I'm unclean. Every time they saw a person. Think about what that must do to you psychologically. What must that do to your identity? Every time you see another human being, you tell them how unclean you are. You don't tell them your name. You don't say, hi, how are you? You don't tell them your occupation. The first words out of your mouth are, I'm unclean. I'm unworthy. Psychologically, you reinforce that insecurity over and over and over. And I wonder if God was saying to Moses, you might not have the skin condition, but you definitely have the mind condition. You may not have the skin of a leper, but you have the heart of one. I wonder if God was trying to help Moses see in a very visual way what his insecurity had done to his identity. He'd run from his people. He was in the back end of nowhere, and God was calling him to this grand adventure, and he was saying, God, I can't. In a very real way, he, like a leper, was shouting to God and saying, God, I'm not worthy. God, I'm not clean. And we can sit here going, yo, that is insane. But how many of us, using different vocabulary, do the same thing every day? When someone comes along to you and gives you a compliment, oh, those are nice clothes. Oh, yeah, it's a hand-me-down. Or is it? How many of us start every conversation by trying to make ourselves seem less because we don't want people to think we're full of ourselves? Sometimes it comes across as self-deprecating humor. Laugh at me because I made a joke. Don't laugh at me because I'm vulnerable. If I can control how you laugh at me, then I can feel okay about it. Perhaps it's sarcasm, as we mentioned earlier. We've adopted this identity of a leper without ever being leprous. Cheryl and I, for a long time, we had to rebuke ourselves, which is never a nice thing. We developed this thing called a theology of vanilla. You might be going, I didn't even know there was such a thing. There isn't. We made it up. Now, what we said was that Cheryl and I are vanilla. Not because of the color of our skin. But you know, vanilla is never flavor of the month. Right? You never go to a shop and on display under flavor in the month is vanilla. It's always there. It's dependable. If you want to party, a 5-liter tub of vanilla is good. So it's always around, but it's no one's favorite. Right? And so we, let's laugh, we're vanilla. We used to joke about it. We used to joke about it and say, well, we're no one's favorite, but we're here. We're dependable. You can chuck sprinkles on us and we're good. But you know what actually we were saying? We're not worthy. I don't believe I'm good enough to be anyone's favorite. I don't believe we're good enough to stand out of the crowd. We're just there. We're in the background. And I think like Moses, God had to say to us, what are you doing? Put your hand back inside the cloak and see what you're really living like, because you are not that. So can I ask you, where have you started declaring over yourself, I'm not worthy? Perhaps it sounds like I'll never be as good as. Perhaps it sounds like I'll always be alone. Perhaps it sounds like I'll never get out of debt. Where have you allowed insecurity to define how you see yourself? Are we okay? Is this helping someone? The last thing God says, after He's tried to remove the unhealthy support systems, after He's tried to change identity, God says to Moses, when you do these two things in public, even if they still don't believe you, what I want you to do is take some water from the Nile and you're going to throw it on the ground and it's going to turn to blood. Where the first two signs were done in private and then repeated in public, God gives Moses one that he couldn't practice. In other words, God was saying to an insecure Moses, don't lean on your staff, don't live like a leper, and trust me with what's next. Trust me with what's next. Think of the words Moses uses. They will not believe me. His insecurity was directly related to what he thought people thought about himself. How often is that true for us? We think we know what other people think about us. And so we respond to them before we've even connected with them. And so his insecurity was directly linked to an encounter with people. And so God says, next time you're in that exact environment where your insecurity will be tempted to rise up and you're going to feel weak and you're going to feel scared and you're going to feel like making jokes and you're going to feel like doing all the things you've done for 40 years, when you're in that moment again, trust me. Trust that I've got you. Trust that even if they don't believe what I've said to you in private, they're going to believe what I'll do for you in public. And so to someone racked with self-doubt and insecurity, God says, trust me with your next. So what's next for you? Because I believe God's saying to many of us, trust me. That next date that you're very nervous about, because the last few dates you've been on have been terrible, God's got you. That next job interview you're going to and you're feeling insecure because you've had one after another, people saying no, God's got you. That next budget you have to do because you're terrified again of looking at the reality of the numbers and knowing what you get doesn't match what you spend, God's got you. That next project, that next opportunity, God's got you. That next test or exam, God's got you. That next difficult conversation you've got to have with your kids, God's got you. That next meeting you have to go to that you hate going to because that meeting is always the meeting that makes you feel insecure, God's got you. Don't lean on something that can't lift you out. Don't live like a leper. And trust that God has what's next for you. And I know that insecurity is not simple. Many of us are insecure about massive things. Some of us are insecure about things we've never vocalized. We've never said it out loud. Insecurity is not an easy thing to just quickly slap a scripture on and trust that it's going to be all okay. This is deep stuff that we're dealing with. And I would suggest that the more we just live with it, the less we're pressing into that abundant life that Jesus promised us. The more we entertain insecurity, the more we're entertaining things that are going to rob us of joy and peace and love. It's going to ruin your relationships. It's going to cloud your opportunities. And it's going to make you wish for something else all the time. So today, we're going to allow God to do some work in us. Today, we're going to allow God in this next moment to minister to us through His Holy Spirit and to allow Him to reveal to us what we've been leaning on and perhaps why we shouldn't be leaning on it. I'm going to ask Holy Spirit now to reveal our identity and where we've started talking about ourselves in ways that God would never talk about us. And perhaps now what you need to do is just come and say, God, I'm giving you what's next. I'm giving you that next conversation, that next moment, that next opportunity, that next challenge, that next. And I'm going to trust that you will be there then as you are right now. I believe that you've got